That day, I just wanted to sell bread. My name is Simon. Simon of Cyrene. And if you've never heard of me, don't worry. For years, I tried to forget who I was too. I tried to forget what happened on that Friday that changed everything. But some things just refuse to leave your soul. I was a simple man. I worked with wheat, made bread, supported my family. I had come from far away, from Cyrene, in Africa, looking for a better life in Jerusalem. I wasn't Jewish, wasn't Roman. I was just someone trying to survive. You know what it's like when you're in the wrong place at the wrong time? When fate just grabs you by the neck and drags you into something you never asked for. It was Friday morning. I was coming back from the field, dirty from work, carrying some grain sacks. The streets felt strange. There was an agitation in the air, you know? That kind of tension you feel before a storm. And then I heard it. The noise. It wasn't just normal street talk. It was screaming. A crowd. It seemed like the whole city was moving in one direction. I thought, Simon, go home. This isn't your problem. But curiosity. Ah, damn curiosity. It was always my weakness. So I got closer. And I saw Jesus of Nazareth. To this day, my heart races when I think about that moment. He was destroyed. Blood running down his face, his back. His tunic stuck to wounded skin. And that cross, my God, that cross was heavy. I worked with wood, I knew. But what struck me wasn't the blood. It wasn't the wounds. It was his eyes, even half closed from pain, even almost without strength. There was something there, a dignity I had never seen in any man. The crowd was shouting terrible things. Crucify! Crucify! Some were spitting, others throwing stones. It was as if all the anger in the world had concentrated in those narrow streets of Jerusalem. And then he fell. The cross was too heavy. He just couldn't take it anymore. He collapsed there, in the dust, in the mud, and for a terrible moment, I thought he had died. The Roman soldiers got irritated. They were in a hurry. A crucifixion was a spectacle, but it was also work. And delayed work irritates anyone. That's when one of them looked around, searching, looking for someone, and his eyes landed on me. You, he shouted, pointing in my direction. You, the African, come here. I thought, no, this can't be happening to me. I looked around, hoping he was talking to someone else. But no, it was really me. Me? I asked, like an idiot. I didn't do anything. I was just passing by. The soldier laughed. A cruel laugh. Nobody did anything, African. But someone needs to carry this cross, and this man clearly can't anymore. You need to understand. I wasn't brave. Never was. I was just a man trying to live his life without problems, without getting into trouble. And there I was, being dragged into the middle of the biggest trouble of all. Please, I said. I have a family. I have work. I can't. But the soldier was already pulling me. His rough hands grabbed my shoulders and pushed me toward that cross. And then I looked at Jesus. He was looking at me too. And there was no anger in his eyes. There was no blame. There was gratitude, understanding. I couldn't name it then, but now I know. There was love. The soldier pushed the cross onto my back. The weight. My God, the weight. It was as if all the suffering in the world had concentrated in those pieces of wood. But I carried it. What else could I do? We started walking. Jesus in front of me, stumbling. Me behind, with that cross crushing my shoulders. The crowd around us, shouting, pushing, spitting. You know what's strange? There, carrying that cross, I began to understand things I had never understood before. About injustice. About how easy it is for a crowd to become cruel. about how sometimes we're chosen for things we didn't ask for, but that need to be done. With each step, I saw women crying, mothers who recognized in Jesus the suffering of their own children. I saw men looking away, ashamed. I saw children being pulled by their mothers so they wouldn't see that. And I thought, what kind of world is this? What kind of world kills its prophets, its healers, its teachers? But I also thought about myself. Simon, I told myself, you're carrying the cross of an innocent man. You're part of this. And that's when it happened, something I could never explain properly. In the middle of that terrible walk, in the middle of the pain and weight and screaming, I felt peace. A strange peace that made no sense at all. As if, for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I should be. It wasn't that the pain had disappeared. The cross still weighed. My shoulders still hurt. But there was something more. Something bigger. When we reached Golgotha, the place of the skull, they took the cross off my back. I almost fell backward. My knees were shaking. I was soaked with sweat, and maybe tears too. And then they nailed Jesus to that cross I had carried. They nailed his hands, his feet. They raised the cross against the gray sky of Jerusalem. Most people left after that. The spectacle was over. But I couldn't leave. I stayed there, watching, waiting, not really knowing why. And then Jesus spoke. Even nailed to that cross, even dying, he spoke. He asked for forgiveness, for his executioners, for the soldiers, for all of us. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. In that moment I knew that I hadn't just carried a cross. I had carried hope, redemption, something that would change the world forever. I went home that night as a different man. My wife asked why I was so quiet. My children, Alexander and Rufus, asked why I was hugging them so tight. How to explain? How to say that you touched eternity? That you carried the instrument of salvation on your own back? In the following days, I heard the stories, the resurrection, the disciples who had fled returning brave as lions, people being transformed, lives being changed. And I understood that none of that would have happened if Jesus hadn't reached that cross. And he wouldn't have reached it if someone hadn't carried it for him in those last few yards. It wasn't chance, you understand? It wasn't coincidence that I was there that morning. Of all the men in Jerusalem, of all the people on those streets, I was the one who was chosen. For years, I thought I had been cursed, that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, that I had been forced into something I didn't want to do. But now I know the truth. I wasn't cursed. I was blessed. I, Simon of Cyrene, an African, a foreigner, a nobody, was chosen to carry the cross of the Savior of the world. You know what the most incredible part is? Years later, when the first Christians began to spread throughout the world, they looked for me. They wanted to hear my story. They wanted to know what it was like to carry that cross. And my children Alexander and Rufus became leaders in the early church. They preached about Jesus. They healed the sick. They spread the good news. All because their father had the privilege of carrying a cross. I look back now, so many years later, and see that moment, those few minutes carrying that cross, were the most important of my life. More important than any bread I sold, any grain I planted, anything I built. You know what else strikes me? It wasn't just those minutes. It was what came after. The nights I woke up thinking about those eyes. The mornings I saw the sun rise and remembered the darkness that covered the earth when Jesus died. My wife said I had changed. You talk less, she said, but your eyes speak more. It was true. How to explain that you had seen love itself being crucified? How to say that you had touched the wood that would save the world? I started attending the meetings of Jesus' followers. At first hidden, afraid. I was still that simple man, remember? But something inside me had awakened. A thirst I couldn't quench. And it was at one of those meetings that I met Mary, Jesus' mother. When she found out who I was, when she found out I had carried her son's cross, she hugged me. She hugged me and cried, and whispered in my ear, "Thank you. Thank you for helping him in his last steps." In that moment, I understood that it hadn't been just chance. It hadn't been just a Roman soldier choosing me randomly. God himself had orchestrated everything. From my departure from Cyrene, my arrival in Jerusalem, to being on that street that exact morning. You know how I'm sure of this? Because years later, when Paul, yes, that Paul who persecuted Christians, came to preach in our community, he looked for me. He said, "Simon, you were mentioned in the letters. You're part of the story. Your children are known throughout the early church. Alexander and Rufus. My boys became giants of faith. Rufus even worked with Paul in Rome. Alexander founded churches in North Africa. And when people asked where their faith came from, they answered, from our Father, from the man who carried the cross. Because that day, I didn't just carry wood. I carried the future. I carried hope. I carried God's love in physical, tangible, real form. And when people ask me if I would do it again, if I would go back in time and choose to carry that cross, I answer without hesitation, yes, 1,000 times yes. Because some moments define who we are. Some acts connect us to eternity. And some burdens are actually gifts in disguise. Today, when I see a young person with problems, when I meet someone lost, when someone asks me about the meaning of life, I tell my story. I tell about that morning when I just wanted to sell bread and ended up carrying the cross that would be used by Jesus to save the world. I am Simon of Cyrene, the man who carried the cross. And this is the story I could never forget. The story that changed everything. The story that proves that God can use anyone, even a frightened African who just wanted to go unnoticed, for his eternal purposes. Because sometimes, my friends, sometimes we're chosen to carry exactly what the world needs to be carried. And when that happens, the weight doesn't matter. The pain doesn't matter. What matters is that we were considered worthy to participate in the miracle.